Hi, I'm Tom Stevenson and welcome to Construction Business Management. Today's topic is how to hire and retain employees in your construction related business. Hiring employees today and yesterday, to be quite honest, has always been a difficult task. And so today we're going to be talking about some of the things that you need to think about in hiring processes and looking to get the best employees possible. Not only that, if you do spend the time to find the right employees, how do you retain them? How do you try to encourage them from wanting to go elsewhere? And so part of that requires you to create a positive culture that makes them want to stay or at least think twice about going to a different company. There's a lot of good companies out there, but there's a lot of not so good companies. And how they view you, their employer, and this particular construction business is very important because it's not always about the money why employees leave. It's very often for a multitude of other reasons. So we're going to explore those different aspects. And we're also going to be bringing into the topic, you hire people tends to be like you wait till the last minute, you need people and you rush out and you get the first person that has a pulse. And that might not be the right fit for your business. So you have to think about a number of factors when you're hiring people. The other thing is, it's probably not a good idea to hire somebody that's just like you. You want some diversity of thought. You want some different ways of thinking when you hire people. You don't want everybody to be sort of automatons doing the same things the same ways that you do. You want other ideas. You want innovative ideas. You want creative problem solving. And so this requires you to also have a very open mind about the people that you're hiring and what their skill sets are and what are their motivations. And that's also a key part as well. So we'll bring in a bunch of those topics into today's discussion. But definitely, it's also how do we develop people when they get hired, and what are some of the things that we can do that creates a positive atmosphere in that way. As an employer, it's not a given that your employees will be loyal to your business, right? You may think that, and they're not always going to think the way that you think because it's your business, it's not their business. And so there's a lot of things that play into that as well. Some employers think everybody should think about their business the way they do. And you're going to be kind of down if you're thinking that everybody's going to be thinking about your business like it's their own business. So we have to have a little bit of latitude there in our thinking as well. And the best of businesses, they put a lot of effort into hiring people. They don't take it lightly. It's why for years my students, they've told me, oh, we had to go through 3 interviews and there was a bunch of people in this process. And you know what, I think if you get through that onto a company like that, they're taking a lot of time and making sure that they get the right people into the business. It's probably a very successfully run business as a result of that. The other thing is, though, you don't want to be spending all that time as an employer trying to get the right people and then mess it up once you hire people. You want to look at the factors that make people enjoy their work, that they want to stay with the business, that they are loyal to the business. You want to create a positive culture. And so you really have to give, as Richard Branson was quoted as saying, business has to give people enriching, rewarding lives, or it's simply not worth doing. And there is a lot of opportunity there for construction businesses to be able to do that. And we've kind of talked about that in other lectures. If you've sort of been following from the beginning, it's been woven throughout. And as we're getting nearer the end to the course, it's starting to come together, how all these different parts fit together. So if you missed any of the previous video lectures, just go to the playlist on my YouTube channel and look under Construction Business Management, and you can see the videos leading up to this one. So some of the causes for employee turnover and burnout. Well, maybe it's a good idea to understand why people leave, and also how people get burned out in their jobs, which tends to mean they eventually leave as well. Dissatisfaction. They're not happy with the work they're doing. And if you look at some people, maybe they're not in the right industry, it's not the right thing for them. They might not be satisfied no matter what you do. So that's where spending a little bit more time in the hiring process, trying to make sure that who you're hiring is actually interested in this type of work is important. And you can vet some of that. Interviews don't do everything, but you can vet some of that to be sure. If they're feeling uncomfortable, and that can be a lot of things in this day and age that can be making people feel uncomfortable, right? There can be, what is acceptable behavior? Have you got policies and practices to ensure that your employees behave in a positive, ethical and moral standards, meeting the high ethical and moral standards? That's important. And do you have unrealistic goals for them, or do they have goals that are placed on them that really aren't meaningful to them? And this is where you can try to align people's interests with what they're doing. In construction, if we're a larger company, we can look at which projects we're assigning certain people to. Like if you've got somebody that really isn't interested in sort of the whole climate change and sustainability aspect, and you do have somebody else that really is interested in it, well, that would be a better alignment if you've got like a LEED Platinum building that you're constructing, to try to align the person that is interested in that. So that's some examples of how that can come into play. Inconsistent and unfair financial rewards. So in the next video, we're going to talk about financial rewards, which is an extrinsic reward. It comes from outside. So there's intrinsic, like I just said, if you're interested in climate change and sustainability, and you get a project that's sort of a premium project like a LEED Platinum building, and you're responsible for those aspects, that would be very intrinsically satisfying. Extrinsically is basically the reward systems, which would be money and those types of rewards. So if you don't have consistency in that area, that would definitely cause some issues, and we'll talk about that. But in human resource management, or people and culture, as we like to say, you really want to have consistent practices, meaning that if I'm an employee, I feel that I'm not being treated drastically different than another employee without there being some sort of logical reason for it. Like somebody that's there 20 years might have certain extra benefits and perks, but then it's consistent and that would be understood. So that would be fine, but it wouldn't be great if somebody just got hired and they have basically the same skill sets as you do, and they're getting paid a fair amount more money to do the same job that you do. That would be, from your perspective, seen to be not fair. And when that happens, then employees they kind of lose interest and they maybe look elsewhere. Relationship problems. Well, again, there can be problems between, we're all human, the relationships between groups and teams and that sort of thing. So that can obviously cause a number of issues as well. And definitely if people go to work and they feel that they're in a team that is very engaging with them, that is providing support, that they enjoy working with, that's a big difference from going to work and being in a team that is dysfunctional, is shouting at each other, they don't have each other's backs. That would be the opposite. So that definitely is something that would lead to turnover and possible burnout. Lack of opportunity. Well, if I'm being hired, a big part of what I'm looking for perhaps as an employee is there an internal labor market? An internal labor market is there an opportunity to move from this position to that position to this position? Can I grow in this company? Some companies have very strong internal labor markets, others don't. You can easily identify if there's an internal labor market if you can see people that started at a lower position and kind of moved up the ranks through the company over the years. If you see a company where nobody's really been there longer than 3 or 4 years and the company's been around for 50 years, well, that's a big indicator or flag, if you will, right there. Unreasonable challenges, that kind of ties with the goals. If you've set the bar so high that it doesn't seem like it's possible, then people lose interest. They're not then either extrinsically or intrinsically motivated on those cases very often. Depersonalization. Well, you're doing this work, you're doing this job, and nobody's paying any attention to you. That's not going to be a high motivational factor. It's depersonalizing for you. Nobody cares what I do. That in Gallup polls, that's been shown to be worse than paying attention to somebody in a negative way, believe it or not. So negative feedback actually scores higher in engagement than no feedback. So you definitely want to have a certain level of feedback, and the best by far is if you can give negative feedback, but if it seems like it's coming from a place of interest and growth, that you are trying to make that person better, they will latch on to that and they will become more engaged, right? So negative feedback, which become just negative, pure negative feedback, which is kind of made personal, that's not great either. It's just slightly better than no feedback at all. So that's not a great way to go from a business perspective with your employees. But if you engage with them and you're really trying to help them be better, and they feel that way, and you're presenting them with a growth mindset over a fixed mindset, then that's going to be quite positive. And of course, if you're in stressful situations with a team, that you have relationship problems and you have goals that are unreasonable, all these things start to pull together, and those are the things that kind of lead to burnout. These last 2 or 3 points that I have there kind of lead to burnout when they're compounded with other points. And at that point, you're either not functioning very well in your job, or you're looking for work elsewhere, or you're off on sick leave, and it's really having drastic mental impacts on you. So these are some of the causes for employee turnover and burnout. And if I'm running a construction business, I should be thinking about, well, how can I create an environment that will have a more positive impact on the employees, and really as a result of that get more productivity out of those employees, and they will actually have more fun doing it, to be honest, if you want to get down to it, to be sure. So the human resource plan can be broken into a number of areas: how to find and hire new employees, how to train your employees, how to reward your employees, how to retain your employees, and how to motivate your employees. All right. So we're going to be talking about some of these in the next module, but we're also going to be integrating them into this module and the next video. So how to find new employees? Well, you really need to know what you're looking for. So you need to have a good, well-developed job description. What is it that you're looking for? If you don't even know that, how do you know when you see it, when you find it, right? You have to have a good job description laid out, what the expectation is for this. And in some companies, if you have a role that you are hiring many people for, then you can sort of define that job description. And then when you need more people, you can look to that job description, and then that will give you some consistency. What is, the pay zone in that job description? What are the expectations? What kind of skill sets should they be coming into the job with? What kind of educational background or apprenticeship should they have completed to perform well in their job roles? So all of those things come into figuring out that aspect, but also you have to think about what are their communication skills, the soft skills, and the soft skills are pretty important too. How do you think that they're going to get along with others in the team? And that's where really thorough interviewing processes with pretty deep kind of questions and sort of examples, and seeing how they respond to those examples can give you some good indicators of how that person may fit in. So definitely you want to be looking at both the technical skills and the soft skills, and keeping in mind on the technical side that they may not have exactly the technical skills, but do they have a level that then you can train them to meet those technical skills that are required. So it depends what you're looking for in that job, but you might have somebody that's pretty close, that really is exceptional in the soft skills, and somebody else that has the technical skills but seems to have some issues on the soft skills. Well, I'd probably be looking at the person that I could train up to that position that seems to have the soft skills done pretty well. So I would look at it from that perspective. And you can have some of your interview questions structured. That'll help determine how that individual's ability is to communicate and work with others. And reference checks are very helpful in this area. And ask some deep and probing questions of the references. Some people just sort of ask people to be their reference without thinking, does this person know me well enough to talk about me? And that's important. I get often asked to be a reference, and it's surprising when I do get called. Very often I don't get that deep or probing questions being asked, and I think the person checking the reference is missing a great opportunity to find a little bit more. And generally, when you're phoning about the references, it's generally near the end, like you've kind of decided this person seems to be a fit, but we just want to confirm it with their references. On the other hand, if you get a reference that seems to be pretty negative on the person, well, then you got to think, well, that's the best that person could do. And if that's the best that person could do, then that's a bit of a problem with regards to a reference. So references is very important from that perspective. Now, references aside, when we think about soft skills, we have to think about the large role it plays on a construction project. You have people working in groups, and there's instructions being passed back and forth, there's work taking place, and it's important that people have respect for each other and that there are strong relationships built within the team. We also have safety considerations on construction projects that we have to be concerned about. So relationships, good communication skills, the soft skills that are involved in building a project are very, very important, probably more important than most jobs when you think about all the complexities that are involved in construction. And so how your employees interact with each other, and also how do they interact with your trade partners, with your clients, with your suppliers, those all play key roles in the success of the business. It only takes one employee to really sort of throw a wrench into the workings of your business. So you have to be conscious of that and make sure that you hire the right people and that they can interact respectfully with each other. Think about if you've in school, when you work in a group and groups that have worked really well together, how you supported each other, how each person had each other's back. Maybe somebody had something going on personally at the time and somebody picked up the slack for that individual. And that probably leaves you with a very vivid, clear understanding of what a well-oiled machine works like and a well-oiled team works like. Now you can think about it the other way. Think about some of the teams that you've worked on in assignments that were dysfunctional, where the relationships were not good, where people let each other down constantly, where there was an adversarial type relationship. And that happens as well. Usually it ends up on my doorstep at a certain point because the team has become totally dysfunctional and can no longer work together well. And what are some of the things that cause that, right? And sometimes it's like some very smart individuals. It's not about sometimes somebody being necessarily a slacker. Sometimes it's about differing viewpoints and not being able to vet them and work them out. So there's a lot of different elements that go into that, but definitely people that have developed a good set of soft skills can usually work their way through things. And sometimes on a construction project, it may be just for a period of time that you have to work with certain individuals. So how can if you've got really good soft skills, you can figure out ways to get through that period of time. You might not want to do it ongoing long term, as we said, some of the reasons why people leave companies. But on construction projects, sometimes it's just for this project. You're dealing with a particular trade partner, perhaps, that's problematic for you. You can usually figure out ways to work through that, just like most teams can figure out how to work through a particular assignment. Probably then, if you've got another assignment or another project in another class, you don't pick the same team. That's why people don't pick the same subcontractors or trade partners sometimes. Sometimes you have excellent people, but maybe the personalities just aren't really that good between each other. So you can still retain those employees, obviously, but maybe you assign them to different projects. So there's a lot of people understanding that goes into this. So where do you post your job descriptions? Well, you know what? One of the most vetted ones or used ones is word of mouth. Is basically, if you have some good employees, you ask them, do you know anybody that would be suitable or that's looking in this area? And when an employee kind of says, yeah, I do, and they refer somebody, usually that employee, they don't take it lightly. Usually they think it through. Well, if I'm going to refer this person, I don't want them to have a negative impact on I referred them. So they usually think it through that they refer somebody that was really good. Going back to student assignments over the years, I've seen students that end up working at a particular company and then they refer their other friend that maybe worked in their team on assignments, and they're working at the same company even 5-10 years later because I run into them. And so that they only refer people if they worked well together in the team. You're not going to refer a person if it was a dysfunctional team. At least I don't think you should. So company bosses and owners kind of look to that, and that's one mechanism. Google even did that in their early days, and they even paid finder's fees to employees that were able to refer somebody that had all the skill sets and qualifications so they could get the right people, because one of the things they struggled was hiring enough of the right people in a short period of time when they were rapidly growing. They, of course, had to have other mechanisms as well. So posting online is probably one of the most common ways of putting up job descriptions, right? So you can post it online. One of the various websites, there's monster.ca, there's LinkedIn, there's all kinds of social media, there's your web page, there's industry association websites, which is a pretty effective way to do that too. And if your company belongs to a industry association, remember we talked about that in the marketing side, it helps to raise the level of professionalism, how your particular business looks. That can also be an excellent avenue. There's a reason why most of the biggest and best construction businesses work closely with colleges and universities. It's not totally altruistic. It's very much that they want to get the best and brightest graduates from those colleges and universities. So that's why they're involved in career fairs and co-op programs, in other aspects of working with colleges and universities, because it can be a good source of getting really, really good students that are graduating and wanting to start their careers in this particular industry. So those are some of the various ways. Of course, if it's a unionized company, they can get people through the local union hall, as they would say, as well. So applicants' qualifications, well, you're going to look at experience. So again, going to the job description, what experience do you need? So what's the minimum amount of experience that you need for this role? Now, you could easily say 10 years experience, but if the job doesn't require 10 years experience, then you just ruled out a whole bunch of people applying that maybe don't have that experience, but they have the skills. So you got to be very careful about if you ask, it's easy to ask for very, very high qualifications, but then you don't get much of a pool to choose from. So that's one thing. Like academic qualifications, you could easily ask for people with a PhD, and you just ruled out about 98% of or 99% of the applicants. If the job doesn't require a PhD, then you shouldn't be asking for it. So you want to require the right level for that. Even when it comes to trade licenses, certain trade licenses are voluntary and certain trade licenses are compulsory. You could say preferred, but maybe you don't want to say that they have to have that. For example, carpentry would be one example. If you're hiring somebody that does formwork, you could have somebody that has 10 years experience, is really good, has good interpersonal skills, but if you're saying they have to have a carpentry license, you've just ruled them out and they're not going to apply. So that thinking that part through, what is necessary for the job, is important. And the references we've talked about, making sure that you vet those references is important. Also, trying to verify all of those aspects, like I said with the references, but making sure too, if they're saying that they have a certificate of qualification or a trade license, that they actually have it. And so you can follow up with them to make sure that they actually have it. Best if you see that there's some inaccuracy or lying going on in the application process, that's a good indication of character and probably somebody that you would want to avoid in hiring. So that's why it's very important to make sure that you do those checks. And you get a lot of information from directly talking with them during the interview. You can have certain aspects are qualitative. You can even attach a test to a job application, depending what it is, to see what their aptitude is towards this. Just be careful that the test is not, again, something that is abstract to what they actually perform on the job. But definitely you can have that, which is much more quantitative. You can measure it much more easier. Soft skills are a little bit more difficult to measure because they're more subjective, they're more qualitative in nature, right? So that's where we sometimes have some of those push points. It's been a long and big area of study as the hiring of individuals. It goes, Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, has talked about the aspect of hiring people and how we can be fooled in interviews by somebody that just sort of comes across really well in the interview process, and just by the way that they're responding to questions. Or I've seen interviews where an interviewee kind of turns it around and really asks questions of the people interviewing them, and sometimes the person that's the decision maker is kind of captivated by it and they want to hire that person. It's sort of like the other people in the actual hiring committee have to kind of say, well, we really didn't get good answers from the individual on the core content. They were asking you questions about your career, and that kind of made you kind of do a lot of the talking. So really understanding how things can often be manipulated in interviews if you're not careful is important. So that's why very often there will be a number of interviews that will take place, so that you have different people in the interview process. You can have basically people that individual would be working with, their boss. You could have somebody then higher up, or somebody from a different department that might have a different perspective. If it's a large company, you'll have somebody from HR, because they want to make sure that you're following all the legal protocols, so there's no discriminatory practices in your hiring processes, and that it's deemed to be fair. These are all things that go into that hiring process. So you really want to choose the right employee based on what they can do. That's important. What can they do for you? Some have really good things that they have said they've done on their resume, but sometimes if you ask more probing questions, you find out they were part of a team and they actually did a very small part of that. So maybe it kind of gives you a little bit of distraction about what they can actually do. So you're really trying to figure out what can they actually do, and do for your company, rather than what they maybe been involved with, but what did they actually do in that other process, right? It might sound great that they worked on this big major project, but if they were really just filing papers or something, that's telling you that they didn't really have a responsible role in that project. So they should be able to prove that they can execute specific job requirements. And as I said, you can have very specific job questions to see that they have a good understanding of the work. Sometimes again in construction, if you're hiring a tradesperson, that sort of thing, they might not be as eloquent as somebody that you're hiring that's had a lot of sort of university education and is used to sort of these hiring practices. So that doesn't necessarily mean they can't do the work. So you also have to kind of look at, well, is there anything that we could do as a work trial? Probationary periods also you should have, so you can see how they work during probationary periods and how that actually works out. So are you hiring or contracting out? That's the other thing. Are you hiring this person based on what they, as an employee or as a contract worker? Now you have to be really careful if somebody's an employee or a contract worker. If they're a contract worker, for how long, right? If you're hiring them like a contract worker for good, and you're just doing it to avoid perhaps paying your workers' compensation, WSIB premiums, or if you're doing it to avoid different government payments like Canada Pension Plan, CPP as an example, your revenue agency like Revenue Canada or the IRS is going to take a very dim view of this. They're going to be saying, no, this is actually an employee, because they get to, if you hire them contracting it out, they get to expense their vehicles and part of their office at home and all these other things as well, when really they're an employee. So that's another aspect that needs to be considered in there. So you want to make sure that you, as a small business, would check with your accountants and make sure that how you're hiring, it fits with your regulatory requirements, so that you're not doing something counter to that, because otherwise you could end up getting audited and owe a lot of money, like WSIB premiums for the last 5 years on this employee, and their basically CPP and other expenses or revenues that you would have had to have provided to Revenue Canada or the IRS or what have you. So make sure that you understand the difference. If you're just hiring somebody for a period of time on this project, and they're not really an employee, they have their own tools and they're making certain decisions around when they do their work, then that's a different story. You can do that, obviously, but just be careful about that and make sure that you understand what those requirements are. And these requirements always change all the time, so you've got to really keep up with them from that perspective. So if you are hiring at that point, make sure that the applicants can communicate and work well in teams. A good question, maybe, out of all the careers that you could have chosen, why did you choose construction? Or whatever the position is for, right? And, sometimes it's very telling, the answers to those questions. I just wanted to drive around in a truck all day. Well, I don't know if that's really showing the kind of passion that you have for construction, right? So there's different responses, and it's really surprising when you do interviews how people respond. And even, I've done literally hundreds of interviews over the years, and when I've seen how people respond, people that are very smart and very articulate, because people get nervous too. So that's the other thing you got to be careful of. Is the person just nervous, right? That's where if you have several interviews, it can be helpful because then people's nerves, as they get a little bit more comfortable, they tend to go down. And so you can try to make it not overpowering on them, and you're trying to get their true self out of it, because there's other people, they can pretty much game an interview. They know how to answer the questions. They're really, really good at it, but doesn't necessarily mean once they actually start working, how well that goes. I've even hired people with long probationary periods, and they're fine up to the probationary period, and then all of a sudden after the probationary period, it was a unionized environment, much more difficult to work with and much more difficult. So they kind of gamed the system in a way. So you do get some of that. So you try your best to vet people that way. And then you also try to keep notes and document from the perspective of long-term, what do you learn from this hiring? Maybe the job description, it's the fault of the job description. It really doesn't respond to the type of work that we actually need to have done, or the skill sets that we need on those people. And we can tweak and we can adjust job descriptions to make them better over time. That's the continuous learning environment. Ask people questions about their long-term goals. You know, I've asked questions like, why, as I said, why do you want this particular job? I had one person that I thought was going to be ideal, and the responses, like on the resume, it looked great, it looked fabulous. You know, this person had this certification and that certification on all of the climate change, sustainability aspects, R2000 certified, and all these other things at the time really stood out. Then I interviewed the person, they didn't seem to have any interest in it. And really the reason they wanted the job was the location and proximity to an ice rink where their son played hockey. Now, nothing wrong with the family aspects, but I wasn't getting any of that they cared at all about the work. So that was kind of a letdown for me, and it kind of taught me something there. So look for literacy, cognitive reasoning, interpretive assessment. Like today, we do have to be able to have certain skills, certain base level skills, and then think about the things we can train up for. Again, you know, you don't have to have somebody that has to have an English degree or anything like that. But I mean, can they communicate to each other effectively, and how do they come across in the interview? Ask them what their work-related successes are. Ask them what their failures are, right? I don't have that there for some reason. I always ask that question. You know, describe a failure that you had and what you learned from it. So, it seems like a simple enough question. Describe a failure you've had and what you've learned from it. Okay, think about it for yourself. Now, if you're in an interview, if you've had some devastating failure, it's probably maybe not the one that you would necessarily bring up, unless you can really sort of describe how it occurred and what you really learned from it and how you put it into practice in the future. But definitely, I don't want to see somebody sit there and, I don't mind somebody that sits there and says, oh, give me a minute. And that's a good thing if you're being interviewed. All of this stuff, by the way, if you're not running the business, if you're applying to a business, just turn it around and think, oh, this is the way an employer should be thinking. So how should I be thinking as a potential employee to get the best of what my motivations are to that, and to see if it fits, right? So if somebody's asking you, what have you failed at? I wouldn't sit there quiet and then say, I can't think of anything. Not good. I had one employee, and they actually, it's in a faculty, in this case, position, and they actually couldn't think of anything that they failed at, right? But the way it came across was they were kind of arrogant. And so then, of course, nobody wanted to hire them, but I knew this individual, like they were basically working as a part-time, and that's not how they are, and that's not who they were. So it took a while to really talk to that hiring team, and then we had to have another interview just to make sure. But the person was nervous, is what I'm getting at. So you have to sort of separate, is this nervousness or is this arrogance, right? And really it's good when you see somebody that they explain something they failed at, and what they learned from it, and what they did about it to get themselves better. I could have pointed out 3 or 4 things that person had failed out just in my interactions of having worked with them, and how they actually recovered from it. And they would have been great examples. So, but it's really interesting to see the kind of examples that you get from that. And when you're asking questions in a group, that's doing an interview, you got to have the questions predefined before the interview so everybody gets the same questions. You want to compare apples to apples from each interviewee to make sure that you're hiring based on the same questions, because otherwise somebody's just asking questions. Some questions could be much harder, some questions could be much easier, and that's not really giving you an apples to apples perspective during the interviewing process. So what we're talking about is hiring the right people. And I've talked about Jim Collins earlier in the course and how Good to Great is an excellent book on this, and his life work is really excellent on this whole aspect of being super successful in running, operating, leading businesses. And so he had this phrase, first who, then what? And this is from his website. First who, then what? Get the right people on the bus is a concept developed in the book Good to Great. Those who build great organizations make sure they have the right people on the bus and the right people in the key seats before they figure out where to drive the bus. Now, we've talked about vision and goals and core values, all of those things right at the beginning of this course. So you're starting to see things are starting to connect up as we move through the financial aspects, as we move through the marketing and the sales and the negotiations aspects, and now we're talking about hiring. These things are being threaded to show how we can have this smooth bicycle wheel with the right alignment in the spokes carrying us through this. So those who build great organizations make sure they have the right people on the bus and the right people in the key seats before they figure out where to drive the bus. They always think first about who and then about what. When facing chaos and uncertainty and you cannot possibly predict what's coming around the corner, your best strategy is to have a busload of people who can adapt and perform brilliantly no matter what comes next. Great vision without great people is irrelevant. So construction sites, we have to be pretty adaptable and agile and flexible. So all my discussion about not putting undue pressure on people, yes, you can put undue pressure on people, but to be honest, construction does have a certain amount of pressures, just its nature. And if we hire the right people that can really understand what's going on, work collaboratively while being engaged, can pivot, adjust, and iterate schedules, project management, then that's going to work really, really well for us. So I think there's a lot we can learn from Collins' research over the decades. And I did go to his website recently, and so he's got this series of videos. So if you follow this link, and I'll put it in the discussion notes below, if you follow this link, there's 7 videos. 6 of them are highlights from the 7th one, which is the whole discussion. So really, I'm just saying, if you watch those 7 videos, which I think they're like 2 or 3 minutes each, some 1 minute. It doesn't take more than 15 minutes to watch the 6 videos. You'll find some really good, inspiring kind of points to understand how this impacts your ability to hire the right people, to effectively lead those people so that you can get the best results of doing everything that we've been kind of talking about in this course. And hopefully that'll hit home with a lot of you from that respect. So in the next video, I'm going to continue on in this topic, and I'm going to be looking at basically the training and reward aspect, which again will strongly connect. Of course, we're on the projects and we're building them, which will strongly connect with everything that we talked about in this lecture and the other lectures as well. So hopefully that gives you a good understanding of the aspect of hiring people and the reason you want to be able to retain them. And you got to have consistent practices involved in your hiring processes. So you have consistent job descriptions. We'll be talking about your reward systems that are involved. How do we train them so they're capable of doing the work and that goals don't seem like they're out of their league, etc. So we'll be looking at all of those aspects coming up, as well as what we just discussed. By the way, in one of the videos, I probably mentioned it earlier in the course when we talked about goal theory. specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. He refers to a BHAG. So if you're wondering what's a BHAG, what's a BHAG, that's one of his famous abbreviations or acronyms, and it stands for Big, Hairy, Audacious Goals, something that is that you're trying to accomplish as a leader in the business. So if it's your business, you should have some big, hairy, audacious goal that you're striving to move the business towards, as we talked about with vision. So I'm Tom Stevenson, hoping that you've got a good understanding of the hiring practices and ways of thinking to hire somebody in the construction business. And we'll see you next time. Don't forget, subscribe to my YouTube channel, click the notifications icon, and you can also go to the playlist, Construction Business Management, to see the rest in this series. Again, I'm Tom Stevenson, wishing you a wonderful day. Bye for now.